says Omicron variants drive a summer surge in cases. The president was said to have, quote, very mild symptoms. He isolated and worked from the White House residence yesterday. Joining us now for more on this and so many other topics, Dr. Scott Gottlieb, former FDA Commissioner and CNBC contributor. He also serves on the boards of Pfizer and Illumina. We're going to talk about monkeypox and the news about America's first polio case in roughly a decade as well. But, Doctor, let's just talk about the prognosis for the president. He's on Paxlovid, we understand. I don't know if you believe that he's taking monoclonals, should be taking monoclonals. What do you think?
Well, look, his prognosis is very good. He's been recently boosted. He received his second shot on March 30th. He's on Paxlovid, which is going to substantially reduce his risk of a bad COVID outcome. And he's, notwithstanding his advanced age, he's otherwise in good health. I think that the risk of him progressing to more severe disease is single digits, probably around 1 or 2%. And they're going to be vigilant. They have other options. They can dose him with the monoclonal antibodies if, in fact, he develops more severe symptoms as remdesivir. So he should be in good shape. I think that from the White House standpoint, we need to remember that he was diagnosed very early in the course of his illness. That this was a routine test that detected this, and then once they found the positive antigen test and confirmed it with PCR, then they elicited the symptoms, going back and asking him, do you have any symptoms? So it's possible that he's going to have more symptoms as the days go by. He might develop a fever. He might develop more URI-type symptoms. So I wouldn't be surprised by that. I think from a White House standpoint, they should be emphasizing that he's at substantially reduced risk given the therapeutics and the vaccination, and not the fact that he doesn't have any symptoms yet. He may, in fact, develop some symptoms before he fully recovers.
Pfizer question, since you're on the board, and given that the president's taking Paxlovid and there's still at least anecdotal evidence of rebound cases all over the country, do you think that the course of Paxlovid should be longer? There are doctors now that are prescribing effectively 2 doses or 2 courses of it at this point.
Yeah, look, I know the FDA is looking at the question, and I'm going to leave it to the regulators to make a decision about that. I think that the studies that have come out, the population-wide studies, the real-world evidence that's looked at the question of rebound, haven't really affirmed the anecdotal reporting that we're seeing on Twitter and from physicians. It does seem to be consistent with what was observed in the clinical trials, where the rate of rebound or people having persistent symptoms after coming off the drug was quite low and consistent with placebo. But I'm going to leave it to the regulators to make a decision about what the appropriate course should be for the drug. The relative risk reduction, if you look at the phase 2, phase 3 study, the EPIC study, the relative risk reduction for someone 65 years or older with Paxlovid was about 94%. So, this, and the hospitalization rate, the risk of hospitalization or death was around 1.1%. So this should have a treatment impact for the president.
Doctor, you've talked about the potential for a surge this summer, and then, of course, this issue of when we're going to get new vaccines, the BA that are based off BA-4, and the sort of race between those two things. How do you think that race is going? Do you think we're going to see those vaccines as early as September or October, and will it be in time?
Well, I think that the BA-4 vaccine, which CDC and FDA seem to have pivoted to, I think will be available at some point in September, and certainly by October you should have it available if everything goes well. Both companies, both Moderna and Pfizer, have said that they could have supply by then, and perhaps substantial supply, enough to meet demand. With respect to the BA-1 vaccine, as you remember, both companies formulated BA-1 bivalent vaccines based on the original Omicron strain. That could be available now. Both companies manufactured that at risk in advance. FDA and CDC have made a decision not to deploy that. I think the Europeans and the Canadians may make a different decision and start deploying that and then roll over into the B4 vaccine when it becomes available. And I also think that the accruing evidence that we've seen, even in recent days, suggests that prior infection with BA-1 does confer not pretty robust protection against BA-4 and BA-5, not absolute for sure, but it does suggest that if you were vaccinated with a BA-1 bivalent vaccine, that would confer better protection against B4 and B5 than the old ancestral strain. So to the extent that we're asking people right now who are at risk to go out and get another booster, I think we should consider whether or not we make that BA-1 bivalent available now to people who are at risk so they can get the better protection from that vaccine. And then when the BA-4 vaccine becomes available, roll that out. There's enough of an interval of time between now and then that people could potentially get boosted with both.
Doctor, it's a semantic argument, obviously, and there's characteristics of both, I guess. But would you say at this point that this is characteristic today? Is it more akin to a pandemic, or is it now moved to where it's endemic? Because every time you talk about people, you say people at risk. Can it be a pandemic if the vast majority of people are not at a high risk of an adverse event? Or what does it have more characteristics of right now, a pandemic or an endemic, which we've been wishing we'd get there for quite a while now?
Well, look, this is an endemic virus, but an endemic virus can cause a pandemic. We have a flu pandemic every year. So, it meets the definition of being a pandemic. You have global spread of a pathogen, uncontrolled spread of a pathogen. But this is, at this point, this is an endemic virus. We're not going to be able to extinguish this.
Well, okay. Are we still in a pandemic?
We're still in the pandemic with COVID, yes. You're going to see, this is probably going to be a seasonal pandemic. Even if this settles into a seasonal pattern, it's going to meet the definition of being a pandemic, even if it's an endemic virus. I think the reality is most people now see the pandemic as a part of the fabric of modern life rather than some kind of public health emergency, and some of that is simply widespread recalibration of risk, but I think most people aren't immunologically naive now, so they have protection. They feel less at risk.
Doctor, we got to talk about polio. What do you make of this? What do you make of this news report?
Well, look, in this case, the sequencing that was done by Wadsworth Center, that's the New York State Public Health Lab, and it was confirmed by CDC, it showed that it was what we call polio sabin type 2 virus. So this is a vaccine-induced infection from the oral polio vaccine, which isn't used here in the U.S. What's unclear is whether or not this individual, a 20-year-old male, they haven't reported any more details, contracted that here in the U.S. or overseas. There was some reporting in the Washington Post that he had recently traveled to Hungary and Poland, which suggests he may have gotten it out of the country. But CDC has to have a theory of the case in terms of the sequence of when he traveled and when he became ill, and they haven't put that out. So it makes me a little suspicious whether or not he got that here or overseas. One thing worth noting is the oral polio vaccine isn't used widely around the world. The place where it's being used right now is in Ukraine because they are experiencing an outbreak of vaccine-derived polio virus. So they've been vaccinating children with the oral polio virus. It's possible that people who migrated out of Ukraine into Poland and Hungary brought some cases into those countries, and perhaps this individual contracted it there, because you're just not seeing a lot of this around the world right now. So it's unclear where he got it. The risk, of course, is that he might have contracted it here in the U.S. from a child who maybe traveled from overseas, and there could be other cases, and that's why you're seeing an effort in Rockland County to get more people vaccinated. Final point I'll make, this particular county has had a low vaccination rate historically in recent years. They had a very big outbreak of measles. I think 312 kids were infected with measles between 2018 and 2019. So there is risk in this particular region of the country.
And how much should we worry more broadly, though?
I think what we should be worried about is declining polio vaccination rates in certain pockets of the country that can create the potential for clusters of illness if you get this infection into those communities. This is a highly contagious virus. I think from this single case, given the fact that it occurred in June, there haven't been any more cases discovered. This probably isn't the leading edge of an outbreak, but it evidences the risk that we face as vaccination rates decline.
Hey, Scott, most people are vaccinated for this, though, right? Most kids are protected. It's part of the normal vaccination regime.
Most kids in the United States receive IPV, the injected polio vaccine. So most kids are protected, but the problem is that the kids who tend not to be vaccinated tend to be clustered in certain communities because you're seeing communities of people make decisions not to vaccinate their kids, and so vaccination rates end up being low in certain pockets of the country, and this is one of those communities, and that's perhaps why you saw the case here.
Okay. Dr. Scott Gottlieb, we appreciate it. Have a good weekend.
Thanks a lot.
Okay. When we come back.